My name's Linda Carver and I'm 66 years old. What I'm about to share changed my life forever. The day we buried my husband, Thomas, was the quietest, emptiest day of my life. As I stood by his grave, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number that froze me in place. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. My hands shook as I replied, "Who are you?" The answer nearly stopped my heart. I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons. If you're watching this, make sure you hit subscribe and tell me where you're tuning in from. Let me give you some context first. I need to know you're with me following my story. I looked over at David and Michael standing by the coffin, their faces strangely calm. Their hugs felt cold, their tears seemed rehearsed. Something was deeply wrong. Thomas and I had been married 42 years. I met him when I was 24 in a small town called Maple Creek, where we both grew up on the same dusty roads and shared simple dreams. I cleaned houses to care for my sick mother, while Thomas fixed bicycles in the shop his father left him. We had little, but we had love, the kind that made everything else feel enough. I still remember the first time he spoke to me. It was a Tuesday morning. I was walking to the market in a faded green dress when he stepped out of his shop, grease on his hands, and smiled shyly. "Good morning, Linda," he said softly. "Need me to take a look at your bike?" I didn't even own one, but I found an excuse just to keep talking to him. From that day on, we spent afternoons under the big oak tree in Main Street Park, whispering promises we later sealed with a small, hopeful wedding. Life was tough in the beginning. We lived in a tiny two-bedroom house with a leaky tin roof, setting out pots every time it rained. But we laughed through it all. Thomas worked from sunrise to sunset in his shop, and I sewed clothes for the women in town. When David was born, my heart nearly burst. 2 years later came Michael, just as perfect. We poured everything we had into those boys. Thomas took them fishing every Sunday, taught them to fix things, told them bedtime stories. I fed them, dressed them, and held them when they cried. We were a family, or so I believed. As they grew, things changed. David, always ambitious, started questioning why we lived so modestly. Michael followed his lead. When David turned 18, Thomas offered him a job at the shop, but he scoffed. "I'm not spending my life covered in grease, Dad. I'm going to be someone important." Those words cut Thomas deeper than he ever admitted. I'd see him on the porch at night, staring at the stars, silent and sad. Years later, David made it big in real estate and Michael followed him to the city. They earned more money than we'd ever dreamed of. At first I was proud. But pride slowly turned into heartache. The visits stopped coming as often, the calls grew shorter. When they did visit, it was in shiny cars and tailored suits. They'd look at us with pity and maybe a little shame. "Mom," David once said, glancing around the old house, "you and Dad should move somewhere nicer. This place is falling apart." He was right. The house was old, but it held our whole life inside it. Every meal, every laugh, every memory. Thomas would just shake his head and sigh, "Money's changed them, Linda. We're not enough anymore." I tried not to believe him. I told myself they were just busy, that they'd come around. But deep down I knew he was right. We'd lost our boys long before I lost my husband. The final blow came when David married Rachel Monroe, a city woman who made no effort to hide how out of place she felt around us. The first time she visited, she stepped onto our porch in heels that sank into the dirt and wore a red dress that probably cost more than everything I owned. "Nice to meet you," she said with a forced smile, barely touching my hand. During dinner, she pushed the food around on her plate and barely ate a bite. That was the night I realized just how far away my son's world had drifted from mine. David seemed nervous that evening, apologizing for things he'd never cared about before. "Next time we'll take them out to dinner," he whispered to Rachel, thinking I couldn't hear. But I did. Every word felt like a knife. Michael, meanwhile, stayed single, but his attitude was no different. He only visited for birthdays or holidays, always glancing at his phone, closing deals even while pretending to talk to us. "Mom, I've got to go," he'd say before dessert. Big meeting in the morning. Family Sundays faded into memory. Christmases turned stiff and formal. The boys would show up with expensive gifts we didn't need, stay a couple of hours and leave with visible relief. Thomas and I grew old together, just the two of us, clinging to our quiet routines. He still worked at the shop though his hands had lost strength, and I kept sewing though my eyes were tired. We got by, proud never to ask for help. One night, sitting on the porch with coffee, Thomas sighed. "You know what hurts the most, Linda? It's not that they have money. It's that they think it makes us worthless." He was right. Our sons hadn't just changed their lives, they'd changed their hearts. To them we were reminders of something they'd rather forget. Things worsened when David bought a $200,000 house in an upscale neighborhood. Michael followed, buying a luxury condo. They'd become wealthy in ways we couldn't even picture. During one rare visit, Rachel suggested, "You should sell this old place and move into a retirement community. You'd be more comfortable." The word community stung. After 40 years of love and hard work, our sons wanted to tuck us away like an inconvenience. Thomas straightened his back and said, calm but firm, "We're fine right here. This is our home." But I saw the look in my sons' eyes. They agreed with her. To them we were a problem to solve. A week later, David showed up with papers in his hand, smiling that fake professional smile. "Dad, Mom," he began, "I've been thinking about your future. This house isn't worth much, maybe $1,000. If you sell it, I'll add some money so you can move somewhere better." But to us there was no better. This was the home where our lives had unfolded. Thomas tried to explain that, but David just talked numbers. "And Dad," he added, "you should retire. You're 70. It's time to rest." Thomas looked at him with such sadness. "Son, work isn't a burden. It's what keeps me alive." Michael jumped in. "You could get hurt. At your age it's risky." Their tone was polite, but underneath it I sensed something else. Impatience, maybe even desperation. The following months grew tense. They kept pushing, bringing real estate agents without warning, getting the house appraised behind our backs. One night over dinner, David said, "Rachel and I want to have kids soon. If you sell this house, that money could be an early inheritance. It'd help us out." An early inheritance while we were still alive. I couldn't speak. Thomas stayed calm, though I saw his jaw tighten. "When your mother and I are gone," he said quietly, "everything we have will be yours. But while we're alive, our choices are ours." "Don't be stubborn," Michael snapped, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard. "You're old. You can't keep living in the past." That night after they left, Thomas and I sat up until sunrise, hearts heavy. For the first time we said it out loud. Maybe our sons weren't the men we thought we'd raised. "Something's wrong, Linda," Thomas whispered. "This isn't just ambition. There's something darker behind all this." I didn't realize then how right he was, or that the tragedy coming our way wouldn't be fate at all, but a plan, carefully set in motion by the very people we loved most. 3 weeks before the accident, David came by alone without Rachel. He looked more serious than usual. "Mom," he said, sitting at the kitchen table where he'd eaten breakfast 1,000 times as a boy, "no matter what happens, Michael and I will always take care of you." At the time his words comforted me. But standing by Thomas's grave later, I couldn't stop replaying that phrase. No matter what happens. What did he know that I didn't? The accident happened on a Tuesday morning. Thomas had left early for the shop, just like he'd done for more than 40 years. I was in the kitchen making his favorite lunch, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, when the phone rang. Something in the tone of that call froze my blood. "Mrs. Carver?" a man's voice asked. "I'm calling from St. Mary's Hospital. Your husband's been in a serious accident. Please come immediately." The world blurred. My knees gave out and I had to grab the doorframe just to stay upright. My neighbor Diane drove me because I couldn't even hold the keys. The whole ride there I kept thinking, Thomas is careful. He never makes mistakes. How could this happen? When we arrived, David and Michael were already there, though I hadn't called them. I was too shaken to question it. "Mom," David said, hugging me tightly, "Dad's in bad shape. The doctors say a machine exploded. He's got burns and a brain injury." Michael's eyes were red, but there was something strange in his face. More tension than grief, as if he were waiting for some kind of news. When the nurse finally let me in, my heart shattered. Thomas was connected to machines, his body wrapped in white bandages. I could barely recognize him. I took his hand, the only part not burned. "Thomas, my love," I whispered, "I'm here. You'll get through this like you always do." For a moment I felt the faintest squeeze. His eyes moved beneath the bandages. My warrior was still fighting. The next 3 days were endless. I slept in the waiting room, barely eating. David and Michael stayed close, but they spent most of their time talking to doctors and making phone calls. I overheard them asking about insurance policies. David mentioning life insurance, Michael about medical coverage. On the second day, David said quietly, "Mom, Dad's life insurance is $50,000. There's also workers' comp that might add 75 more. I snapped, I don't care about money. I just want your father back. He nodded, but his eyes were cold, calculating. By the third day, Dr. Patterson sat us down. Mrs. Carver, he said gently, your husband's condition is critical. The burns are infected and the head trauma is worse than we thought. He's in an induced coma. We can keep him alive indefinitely, but recovery is unlikely. My world collapsed. 42 years of love, gone in a breath. We want to try everything, I cried. Whatever it costs. David exchanged a glance with Michael that made my stomach twist. Mom, David said softly, Dad wouldn't want this. He never wanted to be a burden. A burden? I shouted through tears. He's your father, the man who gave you everything. Michael added quietly, we're just thinking of you, Mom. The bills are going to be huge. Their words echoed in my chest like thunder. For the first time I wondered if my sons were mourning their father, or calculating what came next. They kept talking about money, always money. My husband was dying and they were calculating costs. That night, sitting alone beside Thomas's hospital bed, I held his hand and whispered, my love, I don't know what to do. They say there's no hope, but I can't let you go. I can't imagine life without you. Then something happened that still haunts me. His fingers moved just barely, but I felt it. A soft squeeze, like a whisper from another world. His lips twitched as if he were trying to speak. I called for the nurses, trembling. He's reacting. He's trying to talk. But by the time they arrived, he was still again. The nurse checked the monitors and said gently, sometimes muscles move on their own, ma'am. It doesn't mean he's conscious. But I knew better. Thomas was trying to tell me something. 2 days later, early Friday morning, alarms went off in the ICU. Lights flashed, nurses ran. I had been dozing in the hallway when I heard the noise and bolted upright. No. Please no. I cried as they rushed past me. They worked on him for nearly 40 minutes, but it was no use. At 4:37 a.m. Thomas Carver was pronounced dead. The pain was so sharp it felt physical. I fell beside his bed, holding his still warm body, refusing to believe it was over. When David and Michael arrived an hour later, they didn't look shocked. It was as if they had been expecting the call. They came prepared, with folders, phone numbers, and funeral arrangements already made. We spoke with Maple Creek Funeral Home, David said flatly. They can take the body this morning. Insurance is already processing the claim, Michael added. I stared at them through tears, barely able to speak. How could they be so calm, so organized, when their father had just died? The funeral was set for Monday. David handled everything, barely consulting me. He chose the simplest casket, the shortest service. It's what Dad would have wanted, he insisted. But Thomas deserved better. More than this rushed, hollow farewell. That Monday morning was cold and gray, the kind of day that feels like the sky itself is mourning. Diane helped me button my black dress, the same one I'd worn to my mother's funeral. Be strong, Linda, she whispered as she fixed my hair. But I wasn't strong. I was empty. 42 years of marriage can't be buried in a single morning. When we reached the cemetery, the sight shocked me. There were only a handful of people: David, Michael, Rachel, Diane, and the pastor. None of Thomas's co-workers, none of the neighbors he'd helped for decades. Where's everyone from the shop? I asked. David looked away. We didn't want to bother anyone. Dad was a private man. But that wasn't true. Thomas loved people. He'd have wanted the whole town there to say goodbye. Why had David kept it so secret? During the service, I watched my sons as if they were strangers. David kept glancing at his watch and Michael couldn't stop fidgeting. Rachel sat behind her dark veil, checking her phone when she thought no one noticed. Their father's farewell, and they couldn't even look up. The pastor spoke about peace, eternity, and God's love, but his words felt hollow. I didn't want Thomas to rest in peace. I wanted him home, sitting on the porch drinking coffee with me like always. When it came time to throw dirt over the casket, my legs gave out. Diane held me as I sobbed, the thud of earth on wood echoing like a final heartbeat. And then, my phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. My heart stopped. The letters blurred before my eyes. With shaking hands I typed back, "Who are you?" The reply came instantly. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." The phone slipped from my hand as if it were burning. Diane bent down to pick it up, but I stopped her. No one could see those messages, not until I understood what was happening. "You okay, Mom?" David asked, his expression full of concern. I stared at him, searching for something, any flicker of truth, but every gesture now felt staged. "I'm fine," I lied, slipping the phone into my purse. "I just need to go home." On the drive back, the words kept echoing in my mind. Was this some cruel prank, or could Thomas truly be alive? And if he was, who had we buried? That night, alone in our silent house, I replayed everything. Thomas's accident had been strange from the start. According to David, a machine exploded, but Thomas knew every bolt and wire in that shop. He was obsessive about safety. And how had my sons reached the hospital so fast? The hospital had called me first. How did they know before I did? Then there was the money. From the beginning, David and Michael had talked more about insurance and beneficiaries than grief. That thought chilled me. I went through Thomas's old metal box of papers, the one he kept in his desk. Inside were the life insurance documents David had mentioned. $50,000. But something caught my eye. 6 months earlier, the policy had been increased, from $5,000 to $50,000. Thomas had never told me about that. Who convinced him to make that change? I kept digging and found a new workers' comp policy, bought just 2 months before his death. $5,000 for accidents, $15,000 for death. For us, that was a fortune, and for someone without a conscience, a temptation. Then my phone buzzed again. Check the bank account. See who's been moving money. Whoever this was, they knew too much to be a prankster. They knew about the insurance, about my sons, about details only family would know. The next morning, I went to Maple Creek Savings Bank, where Thomas and I had kept our money for 30 years. The manager, Mrs. Thompson, offered a sad smile. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Linda. Thomas was a good man." "Thank you," I said softly. "I just need to review our accounts." When she showed me the statements, my heart froze. In the last 3 months, someone had withdrawn thousands. 1,000 in January, 3 in February, 4 in March. Who authorized these? I asked. "Your husband came in himself," she replied. "He said it was for shop repairs." But Thomas never mentioned repairs that costly. He was careful, always telling me where every penny went. "Can I see the signatures?" I asked. She brought the slips. Yes, it looked like his handwriting, but it was shaky, uncertain. That wasn't like him. "Did he come alone?" I pressed. Mrs. Thompson frowned. "Now that you mention it, he came once or twice with one of your boys. David, I think. Said he was helping his dad with paperwork because Thomas was having trouble reading." My stomach dropped. Thomas never had trouble reading, not with his glasses. That afternoon, while staring at those withdrawal slips again, another message appeared on my screen. The insurance was their idea. They convinced him it was to protect you. It was a trap. I sat there frozen. The higher insurance, the withdrawals, David's perfect funeral plans, his cold efficiency, it all fit. The truth was too painful to face, yet impossible to ignore. The question that haunted me was unbearable. Had my own sons planned Thomas's death? And if they had, how? And who was sending me these messages? Whoever it was, they knew far too much. The next few days were a blur of fear and doubt. Every smile from David, every hug from Michael, every word of sympathy felt rehearsed, like a mask hiding something dark. Still, I needed proof before I could believe something so monstrous. Then another message appeared. "Go to Thomas's shop. Check his desk. There are things you didn't see." I hadn't set foot there since the accident. When I finally did, the sight stopped me cold. The shop was spotless, too clean for the scene of an explosion. No scorch marks, no broken tools, no damage at all. Every machine, the welder, the compressor, the saw, stood perfectly intact. "Where's the machine that exploded?" I whispered to the empty room. At Thomas's desk, I found a note in his handwriting dated 3 days before he died. "David insists I need more insurance, says it's for Linda. But something feels wrong. I don't trust his intentions." Below it was another. "Michael brought some papers to sign, said they're for shop improvements. I don't understand them. Why the rush?" My heart pounded. Thomas had sensed danger, but he hadn't lived long enough to warn me. Then I found an envelope with my name on it. My hands shook as I opened it. It was a letter. "My dearest Linda, if you're reading this, it means something's happened to me. Lately, I've noticed strange changes in David and Michael. They're too focused on money, the insurance, the house. Rachel's been pushing them. Yesterday, David told me I should worry about accidents at my age. I don't know why, but it sounded like a threat. I love you, Linda. If anything happens to me, don't trust anyone, not even our sons. The letter slipped from my hands. Thomas had known. He'd seen what I refused to see. That evening, David came by with a bottle of wine and a smile that made my skin crawl. Mom, I've been thinking about your future, he said, pouring himself a glass. The insurance money's being processed. It'll be $15,000. How do you know the exact amount? I asked, pretending to sound curious. Well, I helped Dad with the paperwork, he said smoothly. He just wanted you to be comfortable. Why? I already knew the truth from Thomas's note. And what should I do with the money? I asked carefully. His eyes lit up. You could buy a smaller place or maybe move into a nice retirement community. Michael and I could help manage your finances. Make it grow. Manage my money. The words made my stomach twist. We just want to take care of you, Mom, he added softly. At your age, it's easy to make mistakes. Triple my money, I thought bitterly, or make it disappear. Let me think about it, I said, forcing a smile. Rachel chimed in with that sugary tone of hers. But don't take too long, dear. It's for your own good. When they finally left, I sat in the kitchen trembling with rage. My sons had killed their father, and now they wanted to strip away everything he'd left behind. That night, another message arrived. Tomorrow, go to the police. Ask for the report on Thomas's accident. There are contradictions you need to see. The next morning, I drove to the Maple Creek Police Department. Sergeant O'Connell, who'd known Thomas for years, greeted me kindly. You said you're here about your husband's accident? He asked, puzzled. Yes, from the explosion at his shop. He frowned, flipping through his files. Ma'am, we don't have any report of an explosion. In fact, there's no record of any work accident involving Thomas Carver. My stomach dropped. But my son said, that's how he ended up in the hospital. Sergeant O'Connell sighed. According to the medical file, your husband was admitted unconscious, but not from an explosion. The doctors found traces of methanol in his blood, enough to cause blindness, brain damage, and death. Poisoning. The word rang in my ears like a scream. The sergeant's next words froze me. The hospital should have told you, Mrs. Carver. Your husband didn't die from an explosion or a work accident. He was poisoned. Poisoned? I whispered. Why didn't anyone tell me? The immediate family who signed the hospital paperwork requested confidentiality, he said carefully. They thought you were too fragile to handle the details. The immediate family, David and Michael. They had hidden the truth, invented the explosion, and manipulated everyone, even me, to cover up what they'd done. Mrs. Carver, Sergeant O'Connell added, if you suspect foul play, we can open a formal investigation. Suspect? I didn't just suspect. I knew. My sons had murdered their father. That afternoon, Michael came by with a bouquet of flowers and that same insincere smile David always wore. How are you, Mom? You look tired. I'm fine, I said, watching him carefully. Good, he replied quickly. Charles and I were talking. You should sell the house soon before the market drops. Why the rush? Well, old houses lose value fast. You'll need the cash for expenses. Lies. The funeral had been cheap, the medical bills covered. There were no expenses. I met his eyes. Michael, you knew your dad didn't die from a work accident. For a second his face changed, panic flickered, then he forced a smile. What are you talking about, Mom? I went to the police. There's no record of an explosion at the shop. His calm cracked completely. Mom, please. You shouldn't be running around asking questions. You're not thinking clearly. The grief's getting to you. The grief. I said coldly. Or your lies. He stood abruptly, spilling his coffee. You need rest. We'll talk when you're calmer. He stepped outside, whispering urgently into his phone. I couldn't hear the words, but I could feel the fear in his voice. That night, another message appeared. They're coming together tomorrow. They'll try to convince you you're losing your mind. Don't believe them. And don't eat or drink anything they bring. The next day, just as the message warned, David, Michael, and Rachel showed up with fake concern and a bag of pastries. Mom, David began sweetly, we're worried. The neighbors say you've been acting strange. Diane said you're talking to yourself. Why? Diane would never say that. Rachel brought your favorite pastries, Michael added, holding up the bag. And we made that coffee you love. I remembered the warning. Don't eat or drink anything. Thanks, I said coolly, but I've already had breakfast. Rachel smiled, but her eyes were ice. You need to eat, dear. You've lost weight since Thomas passed. I'm fine, I repeated firmly. The brothers exchanged a look, the same one they'd shared at the hospital when the doctor told us Thomas wouldn't recover. Mom, David said, moving closer, we've talked to some doctors about your behavior. Pie behavior? Yes, he said carefully. You've been asking strange questions, visiting the police. It's normal after losing someone, but it can become dangerous. Michael nodded seriously. We spoke to Dr. Monroe. He said older people sometimes develop paranoia after a big loss. Especially women your age. Paranoia. They were trying to paint me as insane. I'm not paranoid, I said, my voice shaking but firm. I'm asking questions I should have asked sooner. David leaned forward. What questions? I stared straight at him. Why there's no police report for your father's accident? Why the shop is spotless if there was an explosion? Why you withdrew $5,000 without telling me? The silence that followed was heavy and electric. Their eyes darted toward each other. Caught. Mom, Michael said softly, those things have simple explanations. Dad withdrew that money to surprise you. What kind of surprise? David answered too quickly. He wanted to remodel the house. New paint, fix the roof for your birthday. I said nothing, just watched them twist deeper into their own lies. Inside, my fear was turning into something colder, resolve. If what they said was true, then where were the workers? Where were the materials? Why hadn't anyone in town heard about this so-called remodeling? As for the police report, David went on smoothly, not every work accident needs one, especially if it's on private property. More lies. Sergeant O'Connell had been clear. Any serious workplace injury required an official report. Mom, Rachel interrupted in her soft, sugary tone, we just want to take care of you. That's why we think it'd be best if you moved somewhere with professional help. A home, David corrected. A care facility for people going through complicated grief. They've got nurses, therapists, activities, you'd love it. And while you're there, Michael added, we can handle the practical stuff. Selling the house, managing your insurance money, all those complicated things you shouldn't have to worry about right now. There was the whole plan. Declare me incompetent, lock me away, and take everything I had left. I looked them straight in the eyes. And what if I refuse? David smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Why would you, Mom? We only want what's best for you. Because this is my house, I said sharply. I built my life here with Thomas. I raised you here. Mom, Michael sighed. You can't live in the past. Dad's gone. You need to move on. I've accepted that, I said quietly, but that doesn't mean I'll give you my home and my money. Their masks slipped. David's expression hardened. All right then. If you won't listen to reason, we'll take more serious steps. What does that mean? It means we'll start the legal process, he said coldly. We already have witnesses, people who've seen your erratic behavior. And we have a statement from a doctor confirming your paranoia. What doctor? Dr. Monroe, Michael replied. He signed a preliminary report based on our description of your behavior. He says you need specialized care. A doctor who had never even met me had labeled me insane, all because of their lies. So, David said, his tone turning firm, you can come willingly or we can make it official. Either way, you're getting help. It was a threat, plain and simple. If I didn't hand them control of my life, they'd take it by force. I need time to think, I told them, keeping my voice calm. Of course, Rachel said sweetly, but not too long, for your own good. When they finally left, I sat alone in the kitchen, trembling with anger and fear. My sons, the boys I'd loved more than anything, had killed their father and were now trying to destroy me too. That night my phone buzzed with a new message, the longest yet. Linda, this is Stephen Callahan, private investigator. Thomas hired me 3 weeks before he died. He suspected David and Michael. They poisoned him with methanol in his morning coffee. I have audio recordings of their conversations. Meet me tomorrow at 3 p.m. at the corner cafe. Sit at the back table. I'll be there. For the first time since Thomas's death, I felt a spark of hope. Finally, I'd meet the person behind the messages, the man with proof. But I also knew time was running out. My sons had made their intentions clear. If I didn't act fast, I'd end up in some home, while they spent the money that cost my husband his life. The battle had begun. And even though I was a 66-year-old widow facing two ruthless men, I had something stronger than them: the truth. And truth, no matter how long it hides, always finds a way out. That night I smiled for the first time in months. Thomas hadn't died in vain. His suspicion, his decision to hire an investigator, it was all leading here. My sons had underestimated me. They were about to learn that a woman fighting for justice for her husband's memory is far more dangerous than they ever imagined. The next day came heavy with nerves and determination. I put on my deep purple dress, the one I saved for important moments, and walked toward the corner cafe. Every shadow on Maple Street made me flinch. Every passerby looked like a spy. The paranoia they accused me of felt almost justified now. Inside the cafe, the air smelled of roasted coffee and old wood. I went straight to the back table, ordered chamomile tea, and waited, my hands trembling slightly on the cup. At exactly 3 o'clock, a tall man in his 50s appeared. Gray hair, kind but serious eyes, a brown folder tucked under his arm. "Mrs. Carver?" he asked in a low, steady voice. I nodded. "You must be Mr. Callahan." I nodded, unable to speak. "I'm Stephen Callahan," the man said softly. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Carver. Thomas was a good man." He sat across from me, placing a thick brown folder on the table. "Before I show you what's inside, I have to warn you, what you're about to hear will be painful. Are you ready?" "I've been ready since your first message," I said, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. Stephen opened the folder and took out a small recorder. "Thomas came to me about a month before he died. He was worried about his sons. He asked me to investigate quietly." He pressed play. My husband's voice, that familiar, gentle tone, filled the space between us. "Stephen, if anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. David and Michael keep pressuring me to increase my life insurance. Yesterday, David brought me papers he said were to protect Linda, but I found clauses that would benefit them directly." My pulse raced. Hearing Thomas again was like having him back for a heartbeat, but every word tore through me. The recording continued. "Michael's been asking strange questions. What I eat when I leave, if Linda comes to the shop. He says it's concern, but something feels off." Stephen paused. "That was 3 weeks before his death," he said quietly. "But there's more." He hit play again. This time the voice was my son's, cold, deliberate, unmistakably David's. "No, we can't wait any longer. The old man's getting suspicious. I already have the methanol. It works perfectly, the symptoms look like a stroke. Mom won't be a problem. Once Dad's gone, she'll be too broken to fight back." Tears streamed down my face. It was his voice, my own son's, planning his father's murder. "There's another," Stephen said almost reluctantly. "This one's from the day before Thomas died." A new recording started. Michael's voice, calm and matter-of-fact. "Everything's ready. Tomorrow, David will mix the methanol into Dad's coffee. We told him it's a vitamin supplement. He'll drink it without a clue. First dizziness, then confusion, then coma. By the time they realize it's poison, it'll be too late." My entire world collapsed. The boys I had nursed, held through fevers and nightmares, had killed their father. "How did you get this?" I asked through tears. "Thomas asked me to place small listening devices around your house," Stephen said gently. He didn't know exactly what to fear, only that something was wrong. He took out photographs. "And this?" David buying methanol at a hardware store outside Maple Creek. Paid in cash under a fake name. We caught it on video. The photos showed my son leaving the store with a small bottle in his hand. The date? 5 days before Thomas's death. Stephen continued, sliding out more papers. "And here, their financial records. In the last 6 months, both have been spending far beyond their income. David owes $70,000 to a private lender in the city. Michael's down $40,000 in gambling debts. It all fit. Greed, desperation, not just greed. They'd been drowning and saw their father as a way out." "Why didn't you go to the police after he died?" I asked. "Because they covered their tracks," Stephen explained. "They bribed the attending doctor to alter the medical report. Official cause, Heart failure from a work accident. Without that, my evidence wasn't enough. I felt a fire rising in my chest. But now we have everything. He nodded slowly. Almost everything. There's one last recording you need to hear. My stomach tightened. What is it? He pressed play. My son's voices again, this time together. Once we get Dad's insurance money, we'll need to take care of Mom too, David said. How? Michael asked. Same way as Dad. We'll make it look like suicide, grief, depression. Nobody will question it. Then the rest, the house, the savings, the insurance, all of it will be ours. Nearly 200,000 total. The recorder clicked off. I sat frozen, trembling so hard my teacup rattled on the table. My sons, my babies, had planned to murder both their parents for money. My sons hadn't just murdered their father, they had planned to murder me too. All for money. Mrs. Carver, Stephen said gently, I know this is devastating. But we have enough to make them pay. What do we do now? I asked, wiping away tears. First, we take everything to the police. Sergeant O'Connell is honest, not part of the corruption. Second, we need to move fast. Your sons are meeting with Judge Miller tomorrow morning to have you declared mentally incompetent. If that happens, you'll lose your legal rights. I stood abruptly, a surge of resolve replacing my grief. Then we act tonight. Exactly, Stephen said. But first, there's one more thing. He pulled a photo from the folder. It showed Thomas leaving a medical clinic I didn't recognize. 3 days before he died, your husband had a full exam. He was perfectly healthy, no heart problems, normal blood pressure. This proves his death wasn't natural. It was murder. I stared at the photo, my throat tight. Thank you, Stephen, I whispered, taking his hand. You kept your promise to him. Now it's my turn to get justice. That night, we went straight to the Maple Creek police station. Sergeant O'Connell was on duty. The quiet hum of the night made our steps echo down the hallway. Sergeant, I said firmly, I need to file a murder report. My husband, Thomas Carver, was poisoned by our sons. He looked up startled. Murder? But the death certificate says heart failure from a work accident. The death certificate is false, I said, placing Stephen's folder on his desk. My husband was poisoned with methanol. For the next 2 hours we laid out everything. The recordings, the photos of David buying methanol, the bank withdrawals, Thomas's medical records, and finally, the taped conversations where my sons admitted to everything, even their plan to kill me. The sergeant listened, his face growing graver with each piece of evidence. When we finished, he sat back, stunned. This is monstrous, he said quietly. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once we arrest them, there's no going back. Sergeant, I replied, my voice steady. Those men murdered my husband. They planned to murder me. They are no longer my sons. They are criminals. He nodded solemnly. We'll need to exhume your husband's body to confirm the methanol traces. Are you prepared for that? Do whatever's necessary. Within the hour, he contacted the district attorney. Even though it was late, the DA arrived to review the evidence. After reading everything, he didn't hesitate. We'll issue the arrest warrants immediately, he said. We'll move at dawn, before they can destroy anything. Stephen walked me home afterward. Will you be all right alone? He asked. I'll be fine, I said quietly. I'm not afraid anymore. I have justice on my side. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen staring at our family photos, at Thomas's smile frozen in time. For the first time since he died, I didn't feel only grief. I felt peace and strength. At 6 in the morning, my phone rang. David's voice came through, urgent and fake. Mom, you need to come to Michael's house right now. Something terrible's happened. What happened? I asked, pretending to panic. It's better if I explain in person. Please hurry. It was a trap. I knew it. But the police were already preparing their move. I'm on my way, I lied. Instead, I stayed by the window waiting. At 7:30, police cars sped down Maple Street, sirens silent but lights flashing. My phone rang over and over. First David, then Michael, their voices desperate now, but I didn't answer. At 9 o'clock there was a knock on my door. Sergeant O'Connell stood there, his expression solemn but satisfied. Mrs. Carver, he said, we've arrested David and Michael. They're in custody, charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. I closed my eyes, exhaling the breath I'd been holding for months. Justice at last had come home. My legs trembled, but not from fear this time, from relief. How did they react? I asked. David denied everything, Sergeant O'Connell said. But when we played the recordings, he broke down. Michael tried to escape. We caught him 6 blocks from his house. That afternoon Rachel came to see me. She arrived sobbing, desperate. A far cry from the cold, polished woman I'd known. "Mrs. Carver, please," she begged. "You have to drop the charges against David. He's not evil, he was desperate. This is my fault too. I pressured him about money." I looked at her without sympathy. "Rachel, your husband poisoned mine. He planned to murder me too. There's no excuse for that." "But we're family," she cried. "The family died," I said quietly, "the day you decided to kill Thomas for money. Now please leave my house." 3 days later, the authorities exhumed Thomas's body. The results confirmed everything: lethal levels of methanol, enough to cause every symptom he'd suffered before dying. The case exploded across Maple Creek. No one could believe 2 sons had murdered their own father for money. The newspapers called it the cruelest crime of the decade. As the investigation continued, more came out. David owed $70,000 to loan sharks who'd begun threatening him. Michael had lost $40,000 gambling and was being hunted by bookies. They'd seen their father's life insurance as salvation, and their greed had driven them to double the policies, which only made Thomas suspicious. The doctor who falsified the death certificate had taken a $5,000 bribe from David. He was arrested too for obstruction and falsifying records. Stephen explained what Thomas had done before he died. "Your husband was smarter than they realized," he told me. "He suspected danger but didn't know from where. That's why he hired me, to investigate and to protect you if anything happened to him." "So he knew?" I asked. "Not exactly," Stephen said, "but he felt something coming. That's why we recorded everything. He wanted to make sure the truth would surface no matter what. Even in death, my husband had protected me. He'd seen the betrayal I refused to see and made sure justice would prevail." The trial date was set for 2 months later. Both David and Michael faced charges of first-degree murder, 25 years to life. When the day came, the courthouse overflowed. Reporters, neighbors, even strangers filled the benches to witness what everyone called the case of the killer sons. I wore my black dress, the same one from our wedding, now a symbol of mourning and dignity. Stephen sat beside me through it all, his quiet strength holding me upright. When my sons entered, handcuffed and dressed in orange, my heart cracked one more time. I didn't feel pity anymore, only grief for the men they'd chosen to become. The prosecutor spoke with calm precision. One by one, the recordings played through the courtroom. Every whisper of their voices, every plan, every cruel word, echoed like thunder. When the tape played of them plotting my death, people gasped. One woman even fled the room in tears. "Ladies and gentlemen," the prosecutor said, turning to the jury, "this isn't ordinary greed. It's deliberate, cold-blooded murder. 2 sons killing the father who loved and sacrificed for them, all for a few insurance checks and debts they couldn't face." Their lawyers tried to spin it: stress, desperation, outside influence. But the truth was undeniable. The recordings didn't lie. The documents didn't lie. The forensics didn't lie. When my name was called, I rose on trembling legs and walked to the stand, heartbroken but steady. I had been waiting for this moment for months. "Mrs. Carver," the prosecutor asked gently, "can you tell us what your relationship was like with your sons before your husband's death?" "I thought it was good," I said, looking straight at David and Michael. "I raised them with love, gave them everything I had. Their father worked from sunrise to sunset to give them a better life. I never imagined that love and sacrifice would become the reason for his murder." "At any point did you suspect they could harm your husband?" "No," I said softly. "That's what hurts the most. I trusted them completely. When they told me Thomas had an accident at the shop, I believed them. When they rushed the funeral, I thought they were just grieving. I didn't know they were hiding a murder." David lowered his head. Michael looked defiant, but I saw the tears in his eyes. Too late for tears. The most shocking moment came when the prosecutor played the full recording of their plan to kill me. David's voice filled the courtroom. "Once we get Dad's insurance money, we'll have to get rid of Mom too. She's starting to get suspicious." A wave of horror rippled through the room. Some people turned to look at me, others shook their heads in disbelief. "How did you feel when you first heard this?" the prosecutor asked. "I realized," I said, my voice trembling, "that I lost my sons long before I lost my husband. The babies I once held and comforted were gone, replaced by strangers capable of anything for money." The defense tried to suggest I'd misunderstood, that grief had made me exaggerate. But the recordings spoke louder than any excuse. Stephen testified next, explaining how Thomas had hired him because he feared his own sons. He described every step of the investigation, every document, every recording. The medical examiner followed, confirming the lethal levels of methanol found in Thomas's body, exactly matching his symptoms before he died. After 3 days of testimony, the prosecutor stood for his closing argument. "Ladies and gentlemen, David and Michael Carver are not victims of circumstance. They are predators who saw their own parents as obstacles to money. They planned, executed, and covered up their father's murder, and plotted the same fate for their mother. They deserve not pity but justice." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the courtroom went silent. "In the case of the state versus David and Michael Carver," the judge read, "on the charge of first-degree murder of Thomas Carver, we find the defendants guilty." Gasps filled the room. David slumped into his chair. Michael sat motionless, staring at nothing. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder against Linda Carver," the judge continued, "we find the defendants guilty." He looked at them sternly. "For the murder of your father and conspiracy to kill your mother, I sentence you both to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 30 years. As the words sank in, I felt something lift from my chest. Justice at last. After the trial, people hugged me, weeping with relief. Diane whispered through her tears, "Thomas can rest now." That night I returned home. It no longer felt haunted by betrayal. It felt like home again, the place where Thomas and I had been happy for 42 years. A week later Stephen came by. "How do you feel?" he asked. "At peace," I said truthfully. "For the first time I sleep without nightmares. Thomas can rest because his death didn't go unpunished." He nodded with quiet pride. "As for the money," I added, "I donated the insurance funds to a foundation for victims of family crimes. That money was stained with blood. I couldn't keep it. My savings were enough to live simply, and that was all I needed." 6 months later I received a letter from prison, from David. "Mom, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. The debts, the money, they blinded us. We destroyed the most loving family in the world for nothing. Tomorrow I'll take my life. I can't live with what we did. Tell Dad we're sorry." He kept his word. I didn't get there in time. When I stood by my son's graves months later, I felt only a quiet sadness. No rage, no hatred, just sorrow for what love can become when it's poisoned by greed. Thomas had been right all along. Truth always finds its way to the surface. And justice, no matter how late, always comes home. David was found hanging in his cell the next morning. When Michael learned of his brother's death, he suffered a complete breakdown and was moved to a psychiatric unit. 2 years after the trial, my life has returned to quiet simplicity. I still live in our little house, and I've turned Thomas's old workshop into a garden. Roses, carnations, sunflowers. Every Sunday I bring flowers to his grave. Stephen visits weekly. He became more than the investigator who helped me, he became family. Sometimes neighbors ask if I miss my sons. I always give the same answer. I miss the boys they once were. But those boys were gone long before Thomas died. I learned that real family isn't blood. It's loyalty, love, and the courage to stand by one another. Thomas was my true family for 42 years. The friends who stood beside me through the trial are family now. Justice didn't bring Thomas back, but it brought peace. On quiet evenings, sitting on our porch the way we used to, I sometimes feel him with me. Proud that I found the strength to do what was right even when it meant losing everything else. It has now been 5 years since the day I received that first message in the cemetery. I'm 71, hair white as winter snow, but my eyes, as my friend Diane tells me, shine with a peace they never had before. I painted the house a warm yellow, Thomas's favorite color, and the garden blooms brighter each year. The foundation I created with his insurance money has grown. The Thomas Carver Foundation for Victims of Family Crimes now helps dozens of families. We offer counselors, lawyers, and investigators so no one has to face what I did alone. 6 months ago, a woman named Eleanor came to us. She believed her brother murdered their mother. We supported her through every step, and 3 months later he was convicted. She hugged me with tears in her eyes. You gave me courage. If you could report your sons, I could report mine. Moments like that remind me why all the pain was worth enduring. Michael is still alive, though he's no longer the son I knew. After David's suicide, his mind broke. He lives in constant guilt, convinced Thomas visits him every night. He writes to me sometimes, rambling apologies begging for forgiveness. For a while I read them, hoping to glimpse the boy I once knew. Now I keep them in a box, unopened. Peace is a fragile thing and I must protect mine. Rachel left town after the trial. Rumor says she changed her name. I don't think of her much anymore. Some questions belong to the past. I live in the present. Spring Creek will never forget what happened. Some call me a hero. Others whisper about the woman who sent her own sons to prison. Let them. I know the truth, and truth has given me peace. My health is good. The doctor says it's because I finally let go of fear and sorrow. The body heals when the heart finds peace, he told me. I believe him. Sundays are still my favorite. I cut flowers from the garden and walk to Thomas's grave. His headstone bears the words I chose after the trial. Love, honorable, never forgotten. I place the flowers, stand quietly, and let the morning breeze carry my gratitude. Thomas didn't die in vain. His courage saved me, and now, through the foundation, it saves others too. And when I sit on our porch in the evenings, coffee in hand, the world quiet around me, I feel him near. Not in sadness but in peace. I survived. I told the truth. And love, Real love, did not lose. Thomas Carver, beloved husband, betrayed father, honorable man. His love was stronger than death. Every Sunday I bring fresh flowers to his grave and tell him about my week. The foundation, the families we've helped, the thank you letters that keep arriving. And every time the wind stirs the trees around me, I feel his quiet approval. Do you know what's strange, my love? I whispered during my last visit. I don't feel pain when I think of David and Michael anymore. Only pity. They had all the love in the world and they chose hate. They could have been honorable men like you, but they chose betrayal instead. Last week, a reporter came from the city to interview me for a documentary about family crimes. She asked if I had a message for others living through similar pain. Family is never an excuse for crime, I told her. Real love has boundaries. If someone who claims to love you can harm you for money or convenience, that's not love, and it's never too late to seek justice, no matter who the culprit is. This year, on the 5th anniversary of Thomas's death, I organized a memorial in his honor. Over 200 people came, neighbors, foundation members, families we've helped. It was beautiful to see how a story born in tragedy had turned into a source of hope. Stephen gave a heartfelt speech. Thomas Carver died because of his son's greed, but his legacy lives on in every family that finds justice through Linda's courage. Evil tried to destroy this story, but good turned it into light. That night, before bed, I looked through old photos of David and Michael as children, laughing in the yard, hugging their father at Christmas. I let myself cry for those innocent boys who once existed before greed consumed them. But I no longer cry for the men they became. Their choices were their own. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if any of this sounds familiar, feel free to share your own story in the comments.